Good evening, everyone. I do trust that you are well. Just give me a minute to catch up. There we are, I can see and hear, so that's good. And then we can just do a bit of social media moving around. And then we'll wait for a few people to come on because I have gone live just ahead of time, and we're back sitting down. That's always cool. We'll just see where we're up to. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. There we are. I've got some paintbrushes that I'm not going to do too much harm to. Absolutely, I have got baby wipes, and I've got painted kitchen towel. So that all together looks quite useful. And I think then we have everything we ready. Hello, Imre. Welcome, my darling. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Good evening, Connie. welcome. Oh, she says sitting on a kitchen scales. That won't do them very good with my big bottom, will it? But there we are. Let's just do a little bit of moving around because we're going to use some products tonight that are from the new collection, and we're also going to use a product that's been in the range for a very long time, and I will explain why I've chosen it. So there's a little sneaky peek. Now to put some of this lot all safely out of harm's way whilst we do a bit more shenaniganing. That's always a good afternoon to a lovely lady from Greece. I trust you are well. Oh, I've got lots of bits like that. So there we are. Just move that over there. So there we are. And it's just gone 6 o'clock. So let's see where we're up to. There's the rest of that. And whilst we just wait for a few people to join, we will just do a little bit of priming of this board. She says getting bits of stuff every which way. I'm mixing up things today. Good evening, Elizabeth. Between the new products and from Pentart, the recent Stamperia collection, and also let's just get rid of that skin before we end up with lumps in everything, and also the some older products as well. And for the ladies in the UK, watch my social media pages for a huge announcement tomorrow. Well, I think it'll happen tomorrow. That's the plan if it all goes well. So this is just a wooden board. It's about probably 10 inches square, but really the size does not matter. And I'm going to share with you a little bit while we just paint this and get this layer of, this is the coarse texture primer from the new range. And you can hear, I think, that there's bits in it. They're quite big bits, but we're just going to give this a little bit of a prime. You just need a key for the next layers to go on to. But this could just provide a subtle texture in its own right. If you didn't want to add anything else over the top. So as a child, I lived in Kent, and I had grandparents who lived on the south coast, and dotted along the south coast it's called the Jurassic Coast, for those of you that are not aware of some of the areas in the UK. And that's because on the surface, or coming to the surface on the cliffs in particular, and in the land areas where the land has fallen, are lots of fossils. And I had a younger brother And so fossil hunting was part of my childhood. And now if you went, we never really dug stuff actively out of the cliff faces because that would be destructive. But if it was sitting there obviously waiting to be taken out, then out it would come, which is cool. So let's just lid that. As I say, that is the I'll show you the pot when I've got the lid on it safely up, because otherwise if I tip it up to show you the title now, I will end up with it tipping everywhere, which is maybe not quite what I want to do. There we are. So as I say, this is the texture primer in course, and there is therefore by default also a fine texture primer. Okay, so let's just pop that now out of harm's way, and we're going to give this a little blast dry before we do the next step. So when I saw that one of the molds from the new Silent Sea collection from a Stamperia with the fossils in it, they reminded me of fossils that have been dug up from you know, as a child, and we'd spend hours cleaning them up. Fortunately, the chalk face of our cliffs meant it was quite easy to clean them up, and that was the concept behind what I'm going to do. So this is going to be what you might term an abstract art piece, but it's going to, I hope, look a bit like a chalk face with a bit of colour and fossils poking out of it. Well, that was the plan, if it all comes together. So we've got some layering and some mixing to do, which will be good, I think, and we'll develop a process that to bring out lots of different layers and texture. Because rock surfaces are definitely not flat. So that's the plan. There will be quite a lot of drying, but that's just life. Good evening, Judith. Welcome. Thank you for watching this evening. And good evening, Julie. Thank you for joining us tonight. Yeah, so yes, we have a plan. We have to re-invoke some ideas from my childhood. Were there many happy hours? Some of them were very happy. My father would spend all day, every day doing it, which as a young child may not have been my preferred activity for holiday, but there we are. So I will lift this at an angle so you can see just how much texture there is. I've painted this primer on, so I've got the grain reasonably well distributed. If you wanted it to have a more random appearance or a more lumpy appearance, for want of a better turn of phrase, then I would suggest that you dab it on. And please don't use your best brushes, because whilst you might think you'll be able to get every last bit of grit out, that may not just happen, and I would hate you to ruin a perfectly good brush. And that's one of the reasons why I have a whole mountain of lots of good brushes sitting to my side, because as we all know, I tend to scrubble stuff. I do have nice brushes for delicate painting, but sometimes you just need some areas that are just a little bit different. Right, okay. Cool. And I'm going to be a bit naughty, she says, because I'm not going to have crackle everywhere. So I'm not going to save time. I'm not going to have crackle everywhere. I just need to find a paint. More paint. Rusty brown. Or dark beige. Dark beige will work quite nicely, because the pastes that are going on the top are going to be white and then coloured. So in the areas that I'm going to crackle, I definitely don't want my bare board So let me just add some areas of this. This is just but a layer, so it doesn't have to be accurate. It's the you know, a lot of this is not going to be on display, and that is absolutely fine. It's just that I don't want the bare areas to be showing all together, if that makes sense. So there we are. Let's just pop that on there. That is the wall paint in dark beige. Here we are. Let me just pop again out of the way onto the floor, because I've got so many things here that it's not true. And I know I had sand and all sorts of other colours out. Moss grey, antique white, rust brown. Wow, what did I do with them? There you go. There we are. We will find them. Aha, there we are. We've popped them over there. So we want that, and we want that as the next one. More that one. So we then, whilst this lot is drying, we'll talk about the cracking plaster, which I've used a couple of times before. So the cracking plaster has its own primer. Do not be tempted to use the universal primer. The wall decor products can be used for mixed media pieces, but the primers for the crackle plaster is specific for the crackle plaster. It's quite a lot thinner. And to be fair, I haven't actually tried it with the universal crackle primer, but I'm told that they're not meant to be used. The crackle plaster is not meant to be used with the universal primer. So that's just a word to the wise. If you think, well, I've got the primer in, if you haven't got the specific cracking plaster primer, then you haven't got the right one for this. There we are. So let me show you some of these things. So the cracking plaster primer clearly tells you it's the primer, and then we have the cracking plaster, which is separate, and it's these two products that go as a duo together, if that makes sense. Good evening, Sarah. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Lorraine, and welcome, Zita. Okay. So those are, yeah, as I say, a duo that go together, and I want these. So I'm going to pop the primer down. And these come in 150ml pots, but they also come in 500 and bigger. So it's definitely thick and gooey. There we are. So let's just pop that on over there for the time being, and then let's just grab a brush, and we're just going to pop it over the area with that paint on it that I've just speed dried. We don't need a big layer or a thick layer, and it goes on this white colour, and will dry clear. I'm just wanting to get some of these layers on, and then we'll move off them for a little bit whilst they give their drying. There we are. So let's just take some of that thick layer that I've popped onto there off, and we're going to pop it a little bit more into there, and then we're going to give this a little bit of a blast dry. There we are. I has a plan. It's always helpful to have a plan, I think. Maybe it's not helpful to have a plan, I don't know. But there we are. So there we are. I don't know how many people are back at work. No, for in the UK it's kids' holidays, so that's always a bit more difficult, isn't it? And people are actively doing other things. There we are. So let's just give this a wee it will dry. As I say, it will go clear. And to be fair, whilst that's doing that, whilst it's sitting there, I might just add the next layer that I want to add, not the love sparkle. There we are. So we can do a little bit. So we have some structure plaster here. Don't worry if this pot is almost empty, because I have another pot. I've got a whacking great big pot, and I want it a bit more gritty than it actually is. So I'm going to take some magnesia powder, and that pot is nearly empty, so I'm going to use that to add a bit more grit into there with the brocante powder. Okay, so that's what that is, and it will clump a little bit, and that's absolutely fine. And I might need to grab the new pot of my structure paste, because that's also okay. So let's just grab that, give this a little mix in here. You can add, you know, you can customize this as much as you want. That's fine. Don't want a thick layer. So that's really showing you. You can really hear the grit that's in that base, I think, from there. So let's just pop this onto here. We'll be adding some layers. Doesn't have to be entirely smooth, because a cliff face isn't entirely smooth, is it? It's got cracks, it's got lumps, it's got bits of stone poking out of it. I didn't actually go and pick up any stones, but that's an option, isn't it? Of course it's an option. I just want a layer to start with, an uneven layer. Let's just pop this onto here. Let's just spin that round. It's going to be easier for me to work from that direction, which is cool. There we are. Oh. So that, as we know, that there are 3 structure products for the new collection: the structure paste, the cracking plaster, and also loft spackle, so, or loft black, depending on how you want to call it. So they're all slightly different in effect and textures, and we're actually going to use all 3 of those tonight. I know, pushing the boat out and pushing my luck, aren't I, really? But from tomorrow, they will be available in the UK. In several places. There we are. So we've got an uneven surface there, and that is just cool for the time being. And you can see, although I thought I was going to finish that pot, actually I've still got some left, which is fine, because I'm going to carry on using it. Let me just give this now a bit more of a blast. And then we'll pop it to get this, so I can get the cracking plaster onto here, and then I'm going to pop it out of the way to dry at that stage, whilst we talk about a product that actually I think probably many of you will not have seen, or will have seen only a very, very long time ago. And I will explain my rationale as to why I have chosen to work with it when we get to it. Okay, hopefully we're going to have lots of layers, lots of texture, and as I say, something that I think would count as an abstract art panel. Might not be everyone's cup of tea, but that's fine. We don't have to always do things that everyone likes, and it's good to know how products work and mix together. I'm not completely convinced that Mr. Facebook is updating all of the replies for me. It's never helpful when it doesn't do that. That's only lots of people are watching. Good evening, Sarah. Hey, but I'm not getting an update in comments. So if you are commenting, ladies, please do not think that I am being rude and ignoring you. It's just that StreamYard isn't putting comments up on my StreamYard screen, and Facebook appears not to be putting any comments up on my Facebook stream on my phone. So it's never helpful. I apologise about that, Vicky. Well, I have changed my internet source, and so I have a faster streaming feed. So hopefully that is good. It's never quite guaranteed, is it? Really, what's going on? So it's not quite dry enough. Thank you, Sarah, my darling. It's always appreciated. The only way I think people get to know about different companies and what's on offer is nowadays they either pay for expensive promoting on Google, or through their Facebook feeds and people sharing the information. So it's always very helpful to have people sharing. So there we are. Now, ideally, you would just leave these to dry on their own, okay? But for the purposes of a live, then obviously there is a time limit to what we might want to, how long we might want to stay on a live, and therefore it's quite important to, to do a little bit of speed drying. But in an ideal world, go and get yourself a cup of coffee, wait a couple of hours, and these will dry spontaneously, and you will get a slightly different effect. But they work perfectly well with without. So this is the cracking plaster. Okay, so I'm going to apply this. She says I'm going to give it a good mix, because some areas have gone quite thick and some are quite thin. That's because it's been quite warm in here, and I found the pot with the lid that hadn't been fully shut, so my bad. But I do have another whacking great big tub of this as well, so let me just rescue what we can. As I say, that is entirely my bad, because the lid was not on properly. So I'm just going to pop this onto these areas where I have the brown. I'm not worried about it all showing, but that's what we're going to do. And you see, there's a big lump in there, but then we'll tackle that in a minute. There it is. Let's just get rid of that into the bin. Yeah, and then spread that out. Push it about a bit. I don't particularly want even crackles. I don't particularly want it all to be in one direction. There is a slightly directional component with this, because I've partly dried the structure paste, then it's sitting on top of it. It shouldn't crackle where the structure paste is, but hopefully it should just crackle where I have the primer for it. And it may not crackle so well with that textured base underneath it, but that's also okay. So let's just make sure we get this lid on properly. There we are. There we are. So that one can go out of the way. That one can go out of the way. That one can go out of the way. Hey, I have a veritable supply of all sorts around me, and that is now going to go on the floor, right side up when I dropped it down. Okay, let me just wipe my fingers and grab some bits. So as I say, the whole concept for this project was that I wanted to use one of the new molds from Stamperia. And I really haven't seen very many makes by the Stamperia team using it, and certainly not very much of it. There we are. Okay, so this is the mold. Let me just grab a piece of black card. There we are. And pop this there. So we've got lots of different molds in there, and I've cast them in resin, the rapid resin. I've cast them in Jasmonite, and then I decided I needed to be able to break them. Well, try as I might, I cannot break the Jasmonite. So I had to rethink what I was doing. And to be fair, I might have been able to break it if I had done it more, sooner than I'd cast it. But I then had a little think. Because thinking's painful, isn't it? Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. So I have a set of scales, and I'm going to use this product. Now, mine's written in Hungarian just to be helpful, but it's modeler powder. It's like a cement, and it comes in big tubs, and it's really quite useful. And as I say, it's been on the market a long time. It comes in 400-gram pots and also slightly bigger ones, but we're going to use this one for the time being. Now, in my crafty stash, there's normally a spoon. Can I? No, I can see a fork. Fork is not a spoon. Right. So I'm not going to be. So on the lid of this pot, it will tell you how much liquid to add. But I think you won't be able to see it on here. So the formula for the modeler powder is 800 ml powder. No, liquid, water, in other words, to 1 kilogram of powder. Well, clearly, I don't need to mix up a kilo of this. So that becomes the same as 80 mils of water plus 100 grams of powder, and that will almost certainly fill this mold. Okay, so that's what I've done, and that's what I'm using. If I take that off there, and you don't have to be uber accurate, so that's saying -2. So let me just turn that off, turn it on, and my scales will zero. But as I say, it's not an uber precise. There's a bit of laxity in it, so we need 100 grams. I'm sorry, you probably can't see what I'm doing, or the numbers, but 100 grams of powder, and it sets reasonably quickly. We might be able to demold it towards the end of the live. There we are, 101 grams. I'm not going to argue, but I am going to lid that so I don't knock a whole mountain of icing sugar type powder all around the room, because that would not impress me one little bit. And then I need 80 mils of water. So I've got a measuring device here for 80 mils of water, and that should weigh approximately 80 grams. And just cold water, doesn't have to be anything specific. So if I pop that into there, we're just over 80 grams, and that is fine. So just helpful, I think, to have that as a reminder. Let's just move that out of the way, save the battery by turning it off. Excellent. Took that now out of the way, and let's just give this a wee little mix up, and it dissolves quite nicely. You see how easy it goes. and get a little bit more paste at the bottom. Let's just give it a nice thing, and you get almost like single cream consistency. Don't try drinking it, I really wouldn't recommend it, and you'll feel it going thick relatively quickly. In fact, not so bad today because it's not so hot, but I think I've probably got that reasonably mixed. A few bits won't matter. Okie dokie. So let me just think this through, because clearly this bit I haven't thought through very well. Let me just grab a board from behind. A board from behind. There we are. There's a board. Because I'm going to need to lift this off here, but keep it reasonably flat. Now, this mould does have a degree of unevenness to it, so just be aware of that. And then it's simply a question of pouring your powder in, your mix in. Oops, and it won't matter if it's gone over, because actually they're not all exactly the same, are they? Let's have the seahorse. And if it doesn't go in completely, it doesn't matter. I just want to use up what I've got. There we are. Because I might as well have it for later on for another make, if nothing else. There we are. Pop that there, pop that there. That can go on the floor. Do not go and wash that down the sink, she says. And just give it a gentle tap. Bubbles will come up to the surface. I'm not worried about the overspill. I wouldn't appreciate it if it was on resin, because that's much more difficult to trim off. But as I say, that is the fossil texture mould, thin mould, and I can now pop that onto the floor, and hopefully by the end of the live it will be done and I will be able to demold them. But what it has allowed me to do, and I don't know whether these are going to let me do it now, you see, they're brittle. So I cast these a couple of days ago, yeah, but it's allowing me to break them, because fossils in the are not going to be all identical and all intact. So that was the concept behind that. So let me just now pick that up. So you just need to be aware, if you're going to use that mold for jewelry or key charms, then use the Jesmonite, because it really is immovable, and I love the natural color, and you could leave it just like that. If you want to paint it, then cast it in the resin, the rapid resin. But otherwise, when you want to break something deliberately, or you're going to have it on a flat surface so it's not going to be subject to torquing, then the modeler powder works really, really well. And you can cast it in much deeper molds, so you can make yourself little pottery pots and coasters and things with it. You just need to let it set, and it really doesn't take a ridiculous amount of time to set. So let's just give this a little bit more of a dry, and then I'm going to controversially use, well, I can see what I've done with it, my structure plaster almost as a glue. So one of the ladies in an American group asked if you could use the structure plaster for adding mosaic tiles in, and the answer apparently is you can. So this might take, I've put the cracking plaster on in areas reasonably thick, and I have a feeling that perhaps the coarse primer I've used may impede the crackle, and that will be my bad if it does. But as I'm just wanting a sorted texture, then I don't actually see any of this as a real problem. There we are. So let me just turn that round. There we are. I'll turn that round. Yeah. It is cracking, but not as much as it would often do. So we're now going to put our fossils into here, and I'm going to use what's left of my structure plaster rather than using up my my heavy body gel. So we're just going to have a little bit of a play. So I have some broken bits of the mold. So let's just add. And if we've got bits that splurge out, it doesn't matter, because actually partly that's what I need is these bits, because it's going to act like almost like a cement. Let me just take these pieces. I do have a vague plan. Oh, she says. There we are. But as I say, I don't mind these hanging out, because that's the reality, isn't it, of how it's going to be. So we've got a trilobite, so we're going to pop that piece there. I might need to get out the new one, the new pot. And we're going to have them, because the creatures layered one on top of each other, didn't they, in different layers of sediment. There we are. So let's just shovel that into there. Okie dokie. And let's just do a little bit of filling with some of these other pieces. And then we're going to do a bit of layering so that they're poked in and out. Don't want that mould, because that is, well, I could use that one perfectly well, to be fair. There we are. So let's just stick into there that little trilobite, and we're almost grouting into here, because there'd be soil, wouldn't there, between these pieces, if it was, or cliff face or chalk or whatever it might be in between otherwise. So this is, I'm using this structure plaster to provide me a stony feel to these pieces. Right, so here is my 1 litre, 1 litre pot. Do you think someone thought I might be using this a lot? Let's just give that a mix. Here we are. So let's just squazzle that into there. You can see, squazzle being a technical term. Yeah, of course it's a technical term. There we are. I might regret having suggested that we do this like this. So we're going to have a part of a seahorse there, and poking up a little bit with another mould poking out from underneath it. And we're going to grout these sides in so it looks less plonked on there, if that makes sense. And it's breaking up these edges a wee bit. Well, that's the plan. Might not have been the intention from Pentacolor to use this as a spackle, a grout, but there we are. So we've got lots of pieces here. So this is another piece that had a piece out there, but that's going to sit into there quite nicely for me. So let's just pop that there. Don't have an issue with that. And that can go there, and then we can pop that in. And we've got another bit. So let's just take another. This has got a little I don't know, almost like an octopusy thing, maybe a leaf. Let's just park this broken bit as if the seahorse got damaged as it was falling down and demising. So that's the plan. Let's just squishle that, take some of that and grout in there. It might take me a bit to get some of this dry, but hey ho. And then we have some other bits and pieces. So we can just carry on then to our heart's content. And even the drips from, there we are, let's just pop that onto there. And then grout in that surface. Because the reality of life is, on the south coast, we had to, you know, they're stuck into the surface. I'm not going to build the whole thing up because clearly that would be incredibly extravagant of material. But I do think it's giving me almost a nice almost tiled effect. And let's see what other bits we've got. We've got another bit of greenery, so that can go into there. And I don't want them to be pristine. And we are definitely going to have to do quite a lot of drying before I can add any colour into here. And I'm going to turn that round a little bit because I'm going to have, ooh, she says, a better view if I do this than if I don't. And I might do a little bit of sprinkling of some powders into here. So let's just make sure that that piece is in and nicely layered. Let's see what else we've got. So that's another broken piece that can go into there. But as I say, they wouldn't all be intact. And that's exactly why I chose the product I have, because I wanted that to be able to break them. Good evening, Jewett. Liz, what? Thank you. So let's just smooth that out a little bit. Smooth that out a little bit. Pop that down there. Cover some of those edges a little bit. We've got a mould here that's intact. Let's just stick that into there. Doesn't have to, you know, sometimes they're stacked one on top of each other, aren't they? And sometimes they aren't, so that's okay. There we are. Let's just pop that one into there. So all of these have got a slightly different image on them. There we are. Let's just stick that so it's partly up and partly not. So again, so it's looking like it might just have, you know, fallen down there. Just need a bit of that grouting into there, a bit more into there. There we are. Oops, she says. It might take me a wee while to get this to the point where I can add colour, ladies, in which case I apologise, but I don't think there's much more we can do. And what do I want? Do I want to add? I'm going to leave that one down there just with a little bit of extra. Nearly there. So that's a leaf. Let's just stick that one up there. And then we've got some extra little bits that come from the moulds. And another fish. Do I like that? Or shall I just pop that one down there? Very much on its own. There we are. So let's just smooth some of these areas down so it almost blends in to the surface. You can add more if you want to, or less if you want to. There we are. And of course you could add in some art stones if that's where you're wanting to go. That would work quite nicely. Adding some more stone effects into it. There we are. So is this how these products were designed to be used? Absolutely not. Does it matter? Absolutely not. Experimenting is good fun. We'll remove the hair. Might not want that in there. There we are. So we've got in a regular surface, and I do have, if I want to, little stones. These pieces, I literally just dropped the remnants of my powder, you know, out of my jug onto the surface, and drop them into place so that they look, as I say, like a bit like stones. So let's just pop a little bit of that into there. They're just filling in the spaces, and you can, yeah, these have cost me nothing because clearly I've made them myself. There we are. And you can have big pieces or you can have little pieces. It's entirely up to you. There we are. So we've now got some interesting textures going on, literally just from bits of the paste that were left lying around. There we are, aka stones. So let's just pop that into there. I'm going to wipe that down. And then lid of that before it goes. So it's pretty much used one of every single bit of that mold has been used there. There we are. There's another bit there. But you can see how you can build yourself a textured surface. Now then, let's put that over there and give this lot an almighty dry, because I need to get some colour on here. And I really didn't need to be making 2 of these, so I had another one part made for you. But the crackle is crackling, and with all I've done is build my layers of texture. And I might have to be slightly careful with painting, and that's also fine. Doesn't really matter from that point of view. So let's just put that there. So, has anyone got any questions they want to ask me about any of the products I have used so far? Because we might just be here a wee while I get this to a stage where I can actually go near it with a paintbrush. But I've no intention of being here for a ridiculous amount of time this evening. So they're sticking quite nicely. And we might resort to sprays with illustrations. Let's just give this, at least if I can get it surface dry, it will help. Now the other thing that you need to be aware of with the modeler paste is that the pieces are absorbent. So if you just paint on them directly, it stinks into the product really quickly. So you just need to be aware of that. I haven't sealed it, but I think you could seal it quite happily, and that will also make life easier for you. Just put that into there. Some of these actually feel reasonably stuck in already. Which is cool. It's still a bit wet. So these products are also quite chalky, so I can use my fingers to go out and thin that down a little bit. Good evening, Donatella. Thank you for joining us this evening. So this is definitely a different make entirely. For those of you that don't know Donatella, she works for, or does a lot of demonstrating for an Italian company, and her YouTube channel is called Casa Donatella, and it's well worth watching. Her style of painting is very different to mine, but very beautiful. So just so that you're aware, there's lots of places for inspiration. There we are. So that's, I'm just holding it here because I quite like the cracking plus. It's crackled beautifully up here. and it is beginning to crackle down here, but I just need it to crackle a bit more before I start adding some colours. And we're definitely not going ornate, but, you know, fussy painting and colouring tonight. That's not what a base would look like, I feel. We're going to put a neutral ground over this though, and then add. I don't mind some of the white showing through, don't mind, and I definitely want some of that beigey sandy colour there, because otherwise there's no point in me having put that in there in the first place. Yeah, so this has now crackled. There we are. You can see that it's crackled. And where it's thicker, it's taking just a bit longer, but this is just going to allow this to dry to the point where I can get, albeit carefully, a layer of paint onto this. They're not solidly stuck, but I think if I'm careful and don't give it a really good shake, then it will be fine for me. I think I need that one to be a bit more dry before I carry on. Who's giving me a bing? You'd think that most people would know by now that I'm live on a Tuesday evening, though to be fair, we have had a bit of a break, so maybe I am being slightly unfair. So that is reasonably dry on there. So I'm now going to, this is called a Lasur gel. Aha! Mr. Minnis, who definitely should know. So it has a transparency and it's gel-like, and I'm just going to, because I don't want this to be completely white as a colour, because the wall isn't going to. I'm just going to give it. I know, you know, I just spent ages drying it, and now I'm giving it a good spritz. You know, why wouldn't you? But it's just going to help me get a layer of colour onto here. It doesn't have to be all over, because it's not, and I accept that it's going to be slightly difficult tonight, because I am you know, I'm working with a base that is not completely dry, but that's okay. So I'm going to mix these colours up. So we'll do I think we might end up with a bit of brush and a bit of, there we go, and then a bit of sponge, just to break this colour down a little bit. And the sponge is going to allow me to lift and colour and get into some of these nooks and crannies, but I don't want it all to be an even face. It will also help seal these pieces in, and then I can start adding some more colours in and around as I choose to. There we are. I want a bit more in the depths, because it really wouldn't be. There we are. That's a bit loose. That obviously didn't have enough gloop on that, but let's just add this. And because I'm using a sponge, I'm getting some natural highlights and some natural lowlights, but I'm also preserving the dark brown that's in that crackle. And by dabbing it, it's allowing me to push the pieces down rather than move it, if that makes sense. So there's lots of different coloured lasers in this the range of of product from the wall decor range. Hair, get out. Not you, obviously. Let me just fish. There's a look. There might not be the look I'm exactly wanting. There we are. So we're giving ourselves a dirty base intentionally, and then we're going to add. And this could be realistic, but if you want sky blue pink pieces, then you have sky blue pink pieces. It's entirely up to you. There we are. So that's given. So these Wallisers are permanent once dry. So let me just add a little bit into these, some of these nooks and the crannies where my brush has not quite got into where I want it to do. So there we are. So we've got an uneven surface with some texture, and it definitely would be much easier if you just let it dry. Thank you, Mr. Computer. I like you to behave. Than if you just do what I'm doing. So, but needs must. There we are. So we've got some texture. We've got that, and we've got a base layer of colour with that. And I'm going to pop this over here. Good evening, Blanche. Welcome, my darling. So I have used the structure plaster, the cracking plaster, and the structure paste plaster mixed with brocante. And I was going to add some stenciling, which I forgot, but that's okay. So let me just give this a bit of a dry. But actually, we're going to use some of the lost spackle. If I get some of these areas done, it's very different, Myra. So Samperia have come out with a mould that has lots of fossils in it. And on the south coast of the UK, there is what we call the Jurassic coastline. And so that's quite a nice, so as a child, I spent many a happy hour, happy being a relative term, on the Jurassic coast with collecting fossils out of the rocks. So let's just have a little bit of this. It might not work so very well. Let's find a small palette knife, because that's going to make my life easier. So this is the new Loft Spackle, and I've got a texture surface, but that's okay because fossils are not going to be entirely normal and intact, are they? So let's just add some little bits. So I'm using, I thought this shell mold stencil would work as a fossil. So don't have to be perfect, because they're not going to be, are they, if they're been under the earth for eons. There we are. So we'll just add some fragments into here, I think. And with the Loft Spackle, nice texture paste that works nicely through the stencils, and it's just going to, as I say, add a little bit more dimension into the piece. There we are. Let's just take a bit. So I'm working on, on a already textured surface here. There we are. Let's just turn that around. We'll add another bit over there, and you can then carry on adding as much or as little as you want. I think we might have a bit more lurking over there. There we are. So parts of it, but as I say, it is a textured background, so it will work for and the stenciling is intentional. It does not need to be perfect. But before I cream crack at this stencil, which I might just be needing to use in a couple of days' time. Let me just give this a good spritz and a clean, and then we'll give the loft spackle a bit of drying. It'll all help the next layers do. Right. So I cast the Blanche, that you say, I put the background down. I cast the molded pieces from Stamperia with modeler powder, so that I could deliberately break some of them, because that was the look that I wanted. I didn't want every piece of fossil to look pristine, because that's just not real life. There we are. Let's just give that a little, so that hopefully will have that reasonably protected. You can feel that it's gritty. There's a powdery feel to quite a lot of these products. Yeah. So let's just pop that over there for the moment. And I'm going to give this a little bit of a blast dry and pick up some more colours, because we have lots of more colours. Right. But before I go adding more colours, I definitely need this piece to be dry, or the loft spackle to be dry. And I'm quite happy for them being actually white, but they won't stay white because of the trick that I'm going to use to get into some of these pannies. It's a trick that my good friend Vasilis Kontos shared, and I think it's quite a good trick for doing things that are just that little bit different. I totally get that this project, and this may not be everyone's complete cup of tea, but it was an idea that just came to my mind and I just wanted to do it. And that's just the way it is. Now, I know I can see that my internet connection is intermittently dropping out. I apologise. I'm meant to have faster connections than having swapped to a new system. But at least one other person has said that one person, after I'd agreed to do it, had told me that they've had issues. So it might not have been my smartest move in the world. So I'm rather hoping that, because the Leser gels are permanent once they're dry, they're going to act as a bit of a resist for me, so that the next layers of colours don't just immediately soak in to the clay pieces, or the modeler case pieces. That's definitely not ready. I would say that none of these products take a ridiculous amount of time to dry, but patience on a live is definitely not necessarily the thing. But we're getting lots of different texture in here, from our plaster, from our loft spackle. The loft spackle has a sort of grey undertone, from the moulded pieces, from the structure plaster. And, I've used the structure plaster as the glue to hold everything together, because that's what would happen in real life, isn't it? Is that would happen? Let's just mush that down a bit. It'll take a little less time to dry if I mush it down a bit, but most of it is getting that. No, it's not. Let's just pop that over there. I'm not sure, Mara, the pretty is quite my definition of it, but I'm rather thinking it will look lovely when it's all finished. Well, that's the plan anyway. That is the plan. Yeah, right. Okay. So I have taken some of the rust Leser metal. Let me see if I can pick it up off the floor. Or I'll take some of the umber. I've taken some of the umber wool lasso and popped it into a spray bottle with some water. Now I've used this when I packed another sample, and I did use boiled water when I did this, and it hasn't gone mouldy. So let's just give this a good spritz. Yeah. I don't want it fully covered, she says, looks like I've got it fully coloured, but I haven't. But it's giving me some texture already, and it's beginning to look a bit more like an old wool. And I can lift colour off. There is only one way of doing this, I'm afraid, and that is to give everything a good blast dry, and then you can make your concentration of your rust colour or your stone stroke earthy colour, any concentration that you want. So that's quite light. I might well stick a rusty brown into here in a minute, but let's just give this a blast dry. I don't mind some of the colours mixing, because soil and clay and rock faces are never going to be all exactly identical. But you can see that having done that, the wet lock spackle over here has absorbed some of the sprayed lasso. We can layer, we can add colour into it. I have got some grey that I mixed with the black and the white lasso. So there's lots of different lassos in the set, in the collection. There's beautiful patina colours. There's ochre. There's a red. There's a blue. Some of those clearly not appropriate for this particular project, but lots of different colour options for you, which I rather really like. And this is a question of just playing and layering as you go. So I'm going to add into here some of the rust brown, because that is when we look at the colour, it's very different. And I'm just going to custom mix. It doesn't have to be, there isn't an exact recipe for this. It's going with the flow as to what's going to work for you. So let's just take some of that and stick it into there. Let's add another one for good luck. So we're going to have a mixture of different colours by doing this, because ground isn't going to be all one colour, is it? There we are. Hopefully we'll get this into here and done up. Any spray bottle will do. I haven't had they're not gritty, they're not micry, they're not chalky, so they don't block your spray nozzles, which is good. So this is now a more rusty colour. Let's get rid of what's in there we are. Okay, so let's just pick up some of this. Just got a baby white. Yeah. Yay, I'm beginning to like it. Okay, let's just give that a dry. If you don't dry in between, or at least almost dry, then the colours will mix and you'll not get the colour definition. But by doing this, it's allowing me to do that. And there's lots of different colours in. But I'm thinking that this is now beginning to look like a bit of a stony, a bit like soil or an old chalk face with the fossils tucked into it. I will add a little bit of grey dry brushing over some of those fossil elements to bring them out. It's not quite finished. Hi Anna, welcome. Let's just give this a little bit of a dry. And it's just a different way of using these. And I'm hoping that it's basically is going to say that you don't need to have, you know, a wall to do these. Okay. So this is black and white mixed together from the Antique Reserves, she says, having not had one. There we are. So we'll add don't you dare. Let's just spread that about a little bit so it's not quite so. Okay. And then we can let this trickle and run. And I definitely want a bit more colour over there. So just bear with. With amongst all of that rain that, that I've got there. And water. So let's trickle some of this off. Let these colours mix in amongst themselves. Dirty it properly up. There we are. And then let's give it a mob. So I've got something that I think now resembles a rock. And let's just take that and a clean wipe. And then we'll give this a proper dry. So I've got, now you can see I've got masses and masses and masses of texture in here. All from one mould and one stencil, and then these pastes and mixing them up. Now in real life, the fossils would be darker. So I'll get these surface dried. And you could carry on layering the colours as much and as little as you want. This is still very, very wet now. But if I get some of this dry, then I can just do a bit of dry brushing on the top of it. Thank you, Mara. As I say, I'm not convinced that this will be a project that is everybody's cup of tea, but I just want to show what happens when you start to play and experiment, and how that you can use what are described as wall products for very much a bespoke art piece type piece, rather than it necessarily having to be, very formed on a wall. That makes sense, because I think a lot of us, I'm not going to tackle big stenciling areas on our living room floors and walls. By all means, if you wish to be my guest. So this is grey lazur, coloured lazur. That is the grey paint. So let's just go with the grey paint rather than this, because I want it to sit on the surface, and I might end up using a bit of all sorts to do that. Let's just pop that there, and let's get a stiff Brussels brush. Let's clear some of this war zone out of the way. Right, let's get rid of that for the time being. Let's just take that out of there, fold it back, and get mucky fingers. Right, let us do some dry brushing now. So knock that off there, onto that, and I'm actually going to take a towel, paper towel, and actually take off nearly all of that. There we are. And add. And you definitely would be better off doing this with when it's not as wet as this is. A bit of patience would be good. But there we are. So we're just going, oops, she says, and that was definitely not the thing to do because that buff spackle over there is still very, very wet. Okay, so let's just turn that round and just add a bit more of this to it. And yes, for me, it's not a pretty make tonight. Okay, and that's absolutely fine because that wasn't where I was going for. In a real world, I would carry on and add some more dry brushing onto that background. I might end up picking up some of the other colours, but it's really, really wet at the moment. And if I think if I'm not very careful, I'm just going to make a mess of that stenciling. But the antique white will work really, really well. So let's just pop that onto there. And let's lid that up. And that was the wall paint. Because I don't want black. Let's give it a little blast and see if I can get this a bit drier to add a little bit of white on, of the antique white paint onto it. So the lost spackle will absorb some of the colour. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's just very, very different. You know, and as I say, it's not my usual style, but I just have this concept in my head. Is it pretty? Absolutely not. Is it intended to be? Absolutely not. Do I love it? Absolutely. Because it's just very different, and it's just showing you what you can do with the different products and the different textures that we've got. That needs to properly dry over there. And it, to me, does look like we've got fossils stuck in a clay wall. In the right place, you know, on the south coast, on the Jurassic coast, in a beach hut, it would work very well, just as an art piece. And they say it's, when you're doing lives, you just have to be aware that maybe not everything will go to plan. That's also fine, but also that because you're doing things real time, you know, on my own, I would walk away. I'd let it dry. I wouldn't take the heat gun to it. But you can do if you're, you know, low on time or impatient, both of which I definitely can be. You know, it's just going to allow you to do these things. So hopefully, let's just pick up the antique white. So the antique white is a softer white. Oh, she says. There we are. And let's just pick up another one of those stiff brushes. Will be better. And tap off just a tiny bit. I might actually resort to the gesso. Have I got my gesso out? I have got my gesso out. just because it's a bit thicker, and I think in the context of everything else being wet, it's going to work better for me. Let me just do a bit of moving around. So this is just the Pentart primer paste. That's better. Let's just tap off most of this onto here. Okay, and let's get rid of that. There we are. Gentle, gentle, gentle. It's going to knock back some of that colour. Remember, I'm thinking South Downs, the Jurassic Coast. Yeah, there's definitely some of that paste is still wet underneath there. That's really not a surprise, is it, when you think of how much I put on there. I can recolour some of that when I want off the live. There we are. So all of that texture that I popped onto there, if it wasn't so wet, would work better. And this is definitely all about the layering. There we are. So where I've knocked the texture base and I've got big splodges of white, I will cover that long term. There we are. And just turn it around. So here I've moved my structure paste that wasn't completely dry. But again, this is definitely a piece where it doesn't have to be so precise, because it's meant to look old and shabby, you know, and like a rock. And this, again, I would probably come back and do this several times. So I've just knocked that over, but that's fine. Let's just take advantage of it. Okie dokie. Let's just take advantage and spread it out where I made a mess. Because we're not going for even. We're going for rock face. I can definitely see that I'm really wet over here, so let me just give that a properly brush dry. That wasn't dried back enough, but that's okay. And the more layers you add, the more you'll bring out your texture. Gentle, gentle, gentle. And there we are. So I can definitely see areas that I know that I need a little bit of a touch up with some of that colour, but that's fine. Once it's properly dry, I can go in and I can add that. So like this area here, I definitely don't want it all of that colour. I can smoosh it out a bit, but I'm going to end up, I think, you know, retouching some of that with some colour. Post live. once it's all had a proper time to dry. So there we are, ladies. A very, very different make from me for the night. I get that it's completely different, but I think it, for my concept of a cliff face, I think that it's done exactly what I wanted. There we are. So this is an area that I'm going to recolor after the live once it's properly dry. In fact, she says, because I'm impatient, we'll just. I'm really impatient. I know I am really impatient. Yeah. Let's just move it about a little bit so it's not quite so white. And then let's just add. And of course you can flick this quite happily. There we are. When all else fails. There we are. That's better. That's better. It's not quite so. White areas I definitely didn't like. From where the structure placed is not, is still dry. That's fine. So I can just add into that. Let's just give it a little bit more texture whilst the going is good. You can be really quite specific then if you want to be. There we are. Define those edges whilst the going's good. Add a bit of shade into it. She says, having said that, she was going to finish the live. Famous last words. Famous last words. There we are. Okie dokie. Sometimes you have to know when to stop. Said no mixed media artist ever. There we are. So I will leave that as it is. I will let it dry. I will come back in and I almost certainly will add a bit of dry brushing in and a bit more splattering. Let me just smooth those edges out so it's not, fingers are good. And we'll share on social media when it's had a little bit more messing about and finessing with some dry brushing when it's properly dry. So, ladies, good night for now. Please stay safe. I may go live on Friday on my page. I might not, but my plan is definitely to go live on my own page on Sunday if you're wanting something to do then. There we are. Fingers. You see, they're such a good tool. So good night, ladies. Please take care and I shall see you soon. Bye.